Donald Trump says Israel is very happy with a new Gaza disarmament agreement. Benjamin Netanyahu has not publicly said the same thing. Hamas says it is ready to begin giving up weapons, but only if Israel first stops its attacks and starts withdrawing. An unnamed senior Israeli official says Israel will not withdraw before Hamas is genuinely disarmed. So, what exactly has been agreed? Is this the first real road out of the Gaza war? Or is it another diplomatic announcement built around a disagreement that nobody has solved? Because behind the optimistic headline is one dangerous question. Who moves first? That question could decide Gaza's reconstruction, Israel's military presence, and whether Netanyahu enters October's election accused of blocking Trump. I will walk you through the written roadmap, the weapons sequence, the pressure on Netanyahu, and why Trump's confidence may make the plan harder for Israel to reject. Stay with me, because one small phrase in this agreement changes the entire story. And if you value clear, sourced analysis without the shouting, subscribe and tell me in the comments. Do you think either side is prepared to take the first risk? Here is what happened. Late on July 30th, 2026, President Trump announced that his Board of Peace had reached an agreement with Hamas and other Palestinian factions on a roadmap for disarmament. The plan connects the storage and decommissioning of weapons to a phased Israeli withdrawal. It also gives a Palestinian technocratic body called the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, or NCAG, responsibility for civilian government and internal security. On July 31st at Camp David in Maryland, Trump said the United States had an understanding with Israel. He described Israel as very happy with the arrangement and said Israel had helped develop it. But Netanyahu did not publicly endorse the document. Reuters reported that Israel had not formally backed the roadmap, while statements attributed to a senior Israeli official said there would be no withdrawal from the yellow line before what Israel calls genuine disarmament. Reuters reported Trump's comments and the competing positions. Hamas confirmed that it accepted the framework, but its language matters. Hamas says Israel must first stop military operations, pull forces back, and increase humanitarian aid. Its weapons would be placed under Palestinian control through the NCAG, not surrendered to Israel or another foreign actor. According to the published roadmap, police weapons would be transferred first. Heavy weapons, military production sites, storage depots, and tunnels would be addressed later through a monitored process tied to Israeli withdrawal. The Associated Press published the 15-point roadmap, and then came the reality check. On August 1st, Reuters reported new Israeli strikes in Gaza. 2 Palestinians were killed in Gaza City. The Israeli military said they were Hamas militants. Separate strikes damaged or destroyed medicine warehouses near Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital after evacuation warnings. Those strikes occurred while Israeli acceptance of the roadmap remained uncertain. Pause on that. The agreement calls for military operations to stop, yet military operations are continuing while the parties argue about who must comply first. To understand why this moment is important, we need to go back to October 7, 2023. Hamas-led attackers crossed into southern Israel, killing about 1,200 people and taking more than 250 hostages, according to Israeli figures cited by Reuters. Israel responded with a massive military campaign in Gaza. More than 2 years later, Gaza has been devastated. Nearly the entire population has been displaced, and the reported Palestinian death toll has risen above 73,000, according to Gaza health authorities cited by major news agencies. Israel says its war was an act of self-defense aimed at destroying Hamas and preventing another October 7th. Reuters and AP provide the figures and competing context. That starting point still shapes every argument today. For many Israelis, Hamas keeping organized weapons after October 7th is not an abstract policy problem. It is treated as an immediate security threat. For Palestinians, the continuing Israeli military presence, repeated strikes, restrictions, displacement, and destruction are not abstract either. They are the daily reality that makes surrendering arms before an Israeli withdrawal feel like giving up the only remaining leverage. Over the next 2 years, ceasefire efforts repeatedly collided with the same basic problem. Israel wanted hostages released, Hamas disarmed, and its security freedom protected. Hamas wanted a permanent end to the war, Israeli withdrawal, aid, reconstruction, and a political path for Palestinians. Mediators could often negotiate a temporary pause or an exchange. They could not easily settle the day after. In September 2025, Trump presented a 20-point Gaza peace plan. Israel initially supported the wider framework. A ceasefire and hostage arrangement was then reached at Sharm el-Sheikh in October 2025. That agreement reduced the fighting and set out obligations for both sides, but its second phase stalled. The central unfinished issues were the same ones now back in the headlines: Hamas's weapons, Israeli withdrawal, Gaza's future government, an international security presence, and reconstruction. In November 2025, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 2803. It recognized the Board of Peace as a temporary framework for Gaza's transition and authorized an international stabilization force through 2027. China and Russia abstained. They argued that the United Nations itself did not have a sufficiently clear role. That detail matters because Trump's board is not simply another conference. It is trying to coordinate security, government, money, verification, and reconstruction at the same time. The UN recorded the vote and the force's mandate. Trump chairs the Board of Peace. Its founding executive figures include Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Envoy Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. More than 24 states joined, including Israel, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, and Pakistan. Several major Western governments declined to join. Critics said the structure gave too much power to Trump and initially lacked direct Palestinian representation. Supporters said the old diplomatic system had failed and a more centralized mechanism was needed. Reuters detailed the board's membership, authority, and criticism. The board held its first meeting in Washington in February 2026. Trump said countries had pledged about $7 billion toward Gaza's reconstruction. But the United Nations, World Bank, and European Union have estimated that rebuilding could cost around $70 billion. That is a gap of roughly $63 billion. The United Nations has also estimated that Gaza contains more than 60 million tons of rubble. So even if the guns fall silent tomorrow, recovery would not be a quick construction project. It would be a generational political and economic operation. Now, move forward to July 2026. Negotiators from Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, the United States, Hamas, and the Board of Peace worked on a detailed 15-point implementation roadmap. The document says both sides must complete their remaining ceasefire obligations. Within 14 days after all parties approve the roadmap, a timetable and implementation mechanism for the next phase must be prepared, unless an international verification committee grants an extension. The sequence then moves through several layers. First, the NCAG enters Gaza and assumes civilian responsibilities. Hamas and other factions are supposed to transfer government and security functions to this technocratic committee and avoid interference. Existing civil servants are to be treated under Palestinian law. Public finances and assets are to be audited. Second, police weapons move under NCAG authority. Police personnel are vetted. Those accepted can serve in the new structure. Those rejected may move into civilian work or retirement. Militia members, however, are not supposed to enter the new police or security services. Third, the harder weapons process begins. Heavy weapons, production facilities, depots, tunnels, and militia arsenals are to be decommissioned and stored gradually. The NCAG is meant to control them. An international verification committee certifies compliance, while the International Stabilization Force supports the process. Personal weapons would also require registration under Palestinian law. Fourth, Israeli forces withdraw in phases as those security steps are completed. The ISF is supposed to separate Israeli troops from areas controlled by the new Palestinian administration, monitor the ceasefire, train police, and help protect aid deliveries. It is not supposed to police Palestinian society directly. Finally, reconstruction begins under a plan supervised by the Board of Peace and the NCAG. The published roadmap sets out these linked phases. Read that again. This is not one exchange on one morning. It is a chain of linked actions, certifications, deployments, handovers, and withdrawals. If one link fails, every later step can stop. The central dispute is sequencing, but the deeper issue is trust. Israel's position is straightforward to understand, even if you disagree with it. Israeli leaders do not want the military to leave territory, and then discover that Hamas hid weapons, preserved tunnels, rebuilt command networks, or transferred fighters into another organization. They remember earlier ceasefires that were followed by renewed conflict. They also point to the difficulty of verifying every tunnel, every weapons cache, and every armed faction in a densely populated and heavily damaged territory. Now ask yourself, what does genuine disarmament mean in measurable terms? Does it mean every rifle leaves Gaza? Does it include the weapons of clans and criminal groups? Who confirms that a tunnel is no longer usable? What happens if Palestinian Islamic Jihad rejects a timetable accepted by Hamas? What if one local commander refuses an order? Israel wants weapons removed from Gaza, not simply locked in a Palestinian-controlled facility where they might later be recovered. That is a major difference between Israel's demand and the written roadmap. Hamas's logic is the mirror image. If it gives up its most important weapons before Israel withdraws, it loses leverage. If Israel then delays withdrawal, expands a security zone, continues targeted strikes, or rejects Palestinian statehood, Hamas cannot easily reverse the decision. The roadmap therefore links disarmament to Israeli movement on the ground. Hamas also avoids presenting the process as surrender to Israel. The weapons would go to a Palestinian authority under Palestinian law with international verification. That language is not cosmetic. It is designed to make the deal politically survivable inside Palestinian society. Hamas can tell its supporters that it is transferring control to a national Palestinian body as part of a path towards self-determination. Israel's far right can answer that storage is not destruction, that Palestinian control is not enough, and that the agreement may preserve the infrastructure of a future threat. This is why the word disarmament means different things to different audiences. For Trump, it means a historic breakthrough and a visible foreign policy achievement. For Israel, it may mean the irreversible removal of Hamas's military capability. For Hamas, it appears to mean a gradual transfer and decommissioning process linked to withdrawal and a Palestinian political horizon. The same word is carrying three separate promises. Sit with that. The agreement could fail even if every leader sincerely says yes, because their definitions of success do not fully match. Then there is Netanyahu's silence. I do not know exactly why he has chosen not to publicly endorse the document. Nobody outside his inner circle can know with confidence. But we can identify the political pressures around him. Israel's national election is scheduled for October 27, 2026. Netanyahu faces criticism from several directions. The far right argues that withdrawal before complete demilitarization would waste Israel's military gains and leave Hamas capable of returning. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir called the draft unacceptable and argued that Israel should continue targeting Hamas leaders. If Netanyahu openly embraces the plan, he risks angering voters and allies who want a harder outcome. But Netanyahu also faces pressure from the center and the opposition. Critics say he prolonged the conflict, failed to produce a clear post-war strategy, and repeatedly promised a decisive victory that remained difficult to define. A July Channel 12 poll reported by the Times of Israel found former military chief Gadi Eisenkot leading Netanyahu by 43% to 34% in a direct preference question for prime minister. Another late July poll found 12% of voters still undecided, equal to roughly 600,000 people, or about 15 Knesset seats. Polls are snapshots, not predictions, but those numbers explain why every Gaza decision now has an electoral meaning. If Netanyahu rejects the agreement, opponents can say he is blocking a chance to end the war, remove Hamas from government, and begin reconstruction. If he accepts it and the process later fails, the right can say he trusted an unenforceable arrangement. If he stays silent, he may be trying to preserve room to negotiate with Trump while avoiding an immediate confrontation inside his coalition. Trump's language narrows that room. By saying Israel helped with the agreement and is very happy, Trump publicly attaches Israel to the result before Netanyahu has endorsed it. This may be intentional pressure. If Netanyahu later says no, he is not only rejecting a Hamas proposal, he is contradicting the American president who says Israel already has an understanding with Washington. That matters because Trump is not behaving like a distant mediator. He chairs the board overseeing the plan. His administration helped write the framework. Israel depends heavily on the United States for military support, diplomatic protection, intelligence cooperation, and regional strategy. A senior U.S. official warned that Trump would be deeply disappointed if Israel blocked the plan. That is diplomatic language, but the signal is not subtle. At the same time, Trump also needs Netanyahu. Israel controls the military facts on the ground. No board can create an Israeli withdrawal through a press release. The United States can apply pressure, offer guarantees, shape aid, and mobilize regional states. It cannot make the plan real without Israeli cooperation. So, the relationship is not simply Washington commanding Jerusalem. It is mutual dependence with unequal power. Trump wants a visible deal. Netanyahu wants security guarantees and political survival. Each man can complicate the other's objectives. The first complication is that violence has not stopped. The August 1st strikes show how quickly implementation can be disrupted. Israel says it will act against people preparing attacks. Hamas says continued strikes prove Israel is not honoring the ceasefire. Every strike can become a security event and an argument over whether the roadmap is already broken. The second complication is the yellow line. Under the October 2025 ceasefire, Israeli forces were supposed to hold a defined area while later phases were negotiated. Israel subsequently expanded the territory under its control. Current estimates vary, but Reuters reported that Israeli forces controlled about 2/3 of Gaza by late April. The new roadmap requires phased withdrawal. Yet the Israeli position is that there will be no movement from the current line before genuine disarmament. Hamas says it will not begin the decisive weapons process until Israel fulfills earlier withdrawal commitments. There is also the problem of verification. The International Verification Committee must certify one phase before the next begins. In theory, that limits unsupported accusations. In practice, its decisions will be political. Suppose it says Hamas transferred 80% of identified heavy weapons. Is that enough for an Israeli pullback? Israel may argue the remaining 20% contains the most dangerous systems. Hamas may argue that Israel left mapped areas but continues drone surveillance and targeted attacks. What counts as completion? The NCAG also carries enormous responsibility. It must govern more than 2 million people, manage civil servants, control weapons, build a police force, coordinate aid, protect public assets, and support reconstruction. It must do this inside devastated territory, between armed factions, under international oversight, and beside an Israeli withdrawal. That is not ordinary administration. It is state-building without a state, perhaps the plan's boldest idea and its weakest point. The third complication is time. U.S. and Board of Peace officials told the Associated Press that initial police weapons could move within about 2 weeks. Heavy weapons and tunnel decommissioning might take between 200 and 350 days. That means the process could extend far beyond Israel's October election. A new Israeli coalition could reinterpret the commitments. Hamas factions could split. International troops could be delayed. Donor governments could change their conditions. The fourth complication is Palestinian statehood. The roadmap refers to a credible path toward Palestinian self-determination and statehood. Hamas says the later surrender of heavy weapons is connected to that political outcome. Netanyahu's government has strongly rejected Palestinian statehood. So the document tries to bridge a contradiction that the leaders have not resolved. Hamas presents statehood as the destination, while Israel's current government rejects that destination. The fifth complication is money. Around $7 billion has reportedly been pledged, while reconstruction may cost about $70 billion. That is only 1/10 of the estimated requirement. Donors will want oversight. Israel will want controls on dual-use materials. Palestinians will want rapid housing, hospitals, water systems, schools, and jobs. Contractors will need security. Insurers will need guarantees. If political implementation stalls, reconstruction money may remain a promise rather than concrete on the ground. And do not miss the human stakes behind these mechanisms. Israeli families want assurance that organized armed groups cannot repeat October 7th. Palestinians want an end to strikes, displacement, hunger, and indefinite military control. A failed roadmap is not merely a diplomatic embarrassment. It could mean another cycle of killing, deeper radicalization, and years more instability. The agreement, therefore, faces a brutal test. It must deliver enough security to persuade Israelis that withdrawal is safe, while delivering enough freedom and political credibility to persuade Palestinians that disarmament is not permanent submission. Let us acknowledge the strongest argument for optimism. This roadmap is more detailed than a vague ceasefire declaration. It names institutions. It assigns responsibilities. It connects weapons, withdrawal, policing, aid, and reconstruction. It creates a verification committee. It prevents weapons from being handed directly to Israel, which may make Palestinian compliance more possible. It also says only one Palestinian authority should ultimately control weapons in Gaza. If implemented, Hamas would leave civilian government, militia weapons would be decommissioned, Israeli forces would withdraw, and an internationally supported Palestinian administration would take over. That would be a profound change. Supporters can also argue that regional conditions have shifted. Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey helped mediate. Arab and Muslim majority states are involved in the board and potential stabilization arrangements. Iran, a major Hamas supporter, has been weakened and distracted by its wider war with the United States and Israel. Hamas may now see political survival through an organized transfer of power as preferable to continued military isolation. Israel, meanwhile, could gain a monitored security structure without being responsible for governing Gaza indefinitely. Now, acknowledge the strongest skeptical argument. The roadmap may postpone the hardest disagreements rather than solve them. Israel has not publicly accepted the new document. Hamas has attached conditions to heavy weapons disarmament. There is no guarantee that every armed faction will comply. The international force is not fully deployed. The Palestinian Technocratic Committee has limited independent power. The Board of Peace is dominated by Trump and has faced criticism over legitimacy and Palestinian representation. And the timetable can be extended. Skeptics can reasonably ask whether weapons placed in Palestinian storage are truly beyond Hamas's reach. They can also ask whether Israel will genuinely withdraw if it retains the ability to declare security violations. Palestinians can reasonably ask whether phased withdrawal will become an open-ended military presence, and whether promised statehood will remain a phrase with no date, border, or enforcement mechanism. Both concerns deserve to be taken seriously. It would be wrong to describe the roadmap as peace already achieved. It would also be wrong to dismiss it simply because implementation is difficult. Major agreements often begin with ambiguity because perfect trust does not exist. The real question is whether the monitoring system can convert ambiguity into measurable steps. Watch actions, not adjectives. Does Israel stop routine strikes and return to the agreed line? Does Hamas provide a credible weapons inventory? Does the NCAG enter Gaza? Are police weapons transferred? Does the verification committee publish clear findings? Does the stabilization force deploy? Those are the indicators that will tell us whether this is a process or a performance. For the United States, this is about far more than Gaza. Trump is trying to show that his administration can reshape the regional order while fighting Iran, protecting Israel, working with Arab governments, and reducing the long-term American military burden. A successful Gaza transition would strengthen his claim that direct pressure and personalized diplomacy can produce results. Failure would raise questions about whether the Board of Peace is an effective institution or a structure built around presidential branding. There is also a domestic American question. U.S. voters are divided over the costs, morality, and strategic value of continued military involvement in the Middle East. Gaza has mobilized protests, divided the Democratic coalition, created arguments inside the Republican movement, and affected America's global reputation. If Trump pressures Israel into a workable withdrawal and disarmament deal, he can present it as an America-first result. If the plan requires years of financing, troops, and crisis management, critics will ask whether Washington has created another open-ended commitment. For Britain and Europe, the challenge is awkward. Major Western governments declined to join Trump's Board of Peace, partly because of concerns about its structure and the role of the United Nations. Yet, European states will still be asked to fund reconstruction, support Palestinian institutions, provide technical expertise, and possibly help train security forces. The European Union has already coordinated about $1 billion in Gaza recovery pledges. Europe may therefore pay for a process it does not fully control. Now ask yourself, can European governments criticize the board's legitimacy while relying on it to deliver access and security? Britain has an additional sensitivity because Tony Blair sits on the board's executive structure. His role brings experience in diplomacy, but it also revives anger over the Iraq War and Britain's imperial history in the region. That can affect how Palestinians and Arab publics view the project, even if the technical plan is sound. Australia is geographically distant, but not politically detached. Canberra must balance its alliance with Washington, its relationship with Israel, its support for international law, humanitarian concerns, and public divisions over Gaza. Any international stabilization mission could produce requests for funding, logistics, police training, intelligence, or diplomatic backing. Australia will need to decide whether supporting the outcome also means supporting Trump's institution. For all these governments, reconstruction finance is the next pressure point. The current pledge level is far below the estimated need. Taxpayers will ask where the money goes. Donors will demand transparency. Palestinians will reject a system that rebuilds homes without producing political rights. Israel will resist funding flows that could restore military capacity. This is why Gaza cannot be separated from the wider regional picture. The agreement touches Iran, Arab normalization with Israel, Red Sea security, energy prices, migration pressure, Western elections, and the credibility of international institutions. A ceasefire that holds could lower regional risk. A deal that collapses after being called historic could make the next negotiation even harder. Oh, where does this leave us? Trump has announced a breakthrough. Hamas has accepted a written roadmap. The roadmap creates a Palestinian governing committee, a verification body, an international stabilization force, a phased weapons process, and a phased Israeli withdrawal, but Netanyahu has not publicly endorsed it. Israeli officials say disarmament must come first. Hamas says Israel must stop attacks and withdraw first. Fresh strikes have already tested the ceasefire. Heavy weapons decommissioning could take most of a year. The political destination, Palestinian statehood, is accepted by one side and rejected by the other. That is not peace, not yet. But it is more than a slogan. It is a written sequence that can now be tested against events on the ground. The next decisive evidence will not come from another speech. It will come from movement. An Israeli pullback, a verified weapons inventory, the entry of the NCAG, the transfer of police arms, the arrival of international personnel, or, alternatively, another strike followed by mutual accusations and a frozen process. I do not know which path comes next. Maybe Trump has created enough pressure to force synchronized steps. Maybe Netanyahu's election calculations and Hamas's conditions will pull the agreement apart. The honest answer is that both outcomes remain possible. But remember the central question: who moves first, and who verifies that movement? If you think Israel should withdraw first, explain what security guarantee would make that safe. If you think Hamas must disarm first, explain what guarantee would ensure Israel then leaves. Put your answer in the comments, because that is the dilemma every negotiator now faces. Subscribe for more in-depth analysis, and watch the yellow line, the weapons timetable, and Netanyahu's next public statement. Those three signals will tell us whether this is the beginning of Gaza's transition or the beginning of another breakdown.